Please be aware that the views expressed in this webinar do not necessarily represent the views, policies, and positions of the Center for Mental Health, the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention, and the Substance Abuse and Mental Health and Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. We would like to ask everyone to help us build a complete participant list. If you are part of a group listening in on a speakerphone, please enter your organization name in the attendance list, then enter the first and last names of everyone who was gathered with you. Today's webinar is titled Native Connections Approach, Part 5, ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. My name is Julie Cahoon, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. Victoria Laframboy is a Native Connections Coordinator, and she will facilitate today's webinar. Our presenter today is Leslie Crow. Leslie is from the Muscogee Cree Nation and is the Native Connections Program Coordinator for her community. I will now turn it over to Vicki to provide an introduction into today's topic.
Do an opening for us. Hunter?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The song I wanted to sing for opening, yesterday we had a holiday in memory of all of our veterans and warriors. I'd like to kind of expand that definition that our warriors are also those language carriers, those cultural carriers, ceremonies. I'd like to ask everyone to sing this veteran song that we think about those that have not returned and those that are still here, and that we pray for their spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical health.
Thank you, Hunter. That was beautiful. These are our learning objectives for today's webinar. Also, childhood experiences, both positive and negative, have a tremendous impact on future violence victimization, lifelong health, and opportunity. As such, early experiences are an important public health issue. Adverse childhood experiences can have negative, lasting effects on health and well-being. These experiences range from physical, emotional, or sexual abuse to parental divorce or the incarceration of a parent or guardian. The ACE study is a research study conducted by the American Health Maintenance Organization, Kaiser Permanente, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Participants were recruited to the study between 1995 and 1997 and have been in long-term follow-up for health outcomes. We will also have Leslie Crow from the Muscogee Creek Nation demonstrate how Native Connections, or how she has applied ACEs to their community. Trauma is part of the circle of life. Trauma is a common experience for adults and children in American communities. There is also a very long history of trauma in Native American communities, families, and nations. It is especially common in the lives of people with mental and substance misuse disorders. For this reason, the need to address trauma is increasingly seen as an important part of effective behavioral health care. Trauma is like a roadblock or a burden in our path. Healing is the way to make the roadblock or burden more manageable or to make it go away completely. Healing means that the circle is whole again. One must know how to change one's thinking, feelings, and beliefs about a traumatic experience in order to regain balance or harmony in one's own life. We now know that a traumatic event can leave psychological symptoms long after any physical injuries have healed. Trauma and violence are widespread, harmful, and costly public health concerns. They have no boundaries with regard to age, gender, socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, or sexual orientation. So what is ACEs, or the Adverse Childhood Experiences? Much of the foundational research in this area have been referred to as Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACEs, as I will refer to it mostly today. ACEs started as a study. The original study, a study, was conducted at Kaiser Permanente, like I said, from 1995 to 1997, with 2 ways of data collection. ACEs are potentially traumatic events that can have negative, lasting effects on health and well-being. They, again, range from physical, emotional, or sexual abuse to parental divorce or the incarceration of a parent or guardian, or even somebody that lives in the household. ACE describes a traumatic experience in a person's life occurring before the age of 18 that the person remembers as an adult. Although many people who experience a traumatic event will go on with their lives without lasting negative effects, others will have difficulties and experience traumatic stress reactions. How someone responds to a traumatic experience is personal. If there's a strong support system in place, little or no prior traumatic experiences, and if the individual has many resilient qualities, it may not affect his or her mental health. Research has shown that traumatic experiences are associated with both behavioral health and chronic physical conditions, especially those traumatic events that occur during childhood. Substance misuse, such as smoking, excessive alcohol use, and taking drugs, mental health problems, such as depression, anxiety, or PTSD, and other risky behaviors, such as self-injury and risky sexual encounters, have been linked with traumatic experiences. Because both these behavioral health concerns can present challenges in relationships, careers, or other aspects of our lives, it is important to understand the nature and impact of trauma and to explore healing. The Adverse Childhood Experiences is a 10-question survey. And we will have the survey questions to the coordinators, and they can get them out to you if you request them. Childhood experiences, both positive and negative, again, have a tremendous impact on our future life. There are 10 types of childhood trauma questions measured in the ACE study. 5 are personal, that relate to physical abuse, verbal abuse, and sexual abuse, physical neglect, and emotional neglect. 5 are related to other family members, such as a parent who is an alcoholic, a mother who may have been a victim of domestic violence, a member that's been incarcerated, a family member diagnosed with a mental illness, or the disappearance of a parent through divorce or separation, and death or abandonment. Each type of trauma counts as 1. So a person who's been physically abused with one alcoholic parent and a mother who is beaten up has a score of 3. The most important thing to remember is that the ACE score is meant to be a guideline. It does not dictate your future. The ACE study found that the number of categories, not necessarily the frequency or severity of the experiences within a category, determine the quality of mental and physical health. The study showed that the higher the ACE score, the higher the risk of disease, suicide, violent behavior, or being a victim of violence. Again, the most important thing to remember is that the ACE score is meant to be a guideline, and it does not define who you are. So the higher the ACE score, the greater the risk to experience possible impacts of adverse experience. The important thing to remember is that the ACE score is not what is wrong with you, rather what has happened to you under the age of 18. So it's just important, that we know what our cholesterol level is, that everybody should know what his or her ACE score is. Being aware of your exposure to trauma and one's personal resiliency and resources used to overcome can be a good thing. Self-knowledge is always a good thing as well. And knowing where to go for help can also help you if you have a high ACE score. The ACE study is probably the most important public health study you never heard of. In the 1980s, the dropout rate of a obesity clinic, of the rates of participants from Kaiser Permanente's obesity clinic, was about 50%. Despite all of the dropouts successfully losing weight under the program, the head of Kaiser Permanente's Department of Preventive Medicine conducted interviews with people who had left the program and discovered that a majority of the 286 people that he had interviewed had experienced some kind of childhood sexual abuse. The interview findings suggested that the weight gain might be a coping mechanism for depression, anxiety, and our fear. The researchers from the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, went on to survey childhood traumatic experiences over 17,000 Kaiser Permanente patients. They were all volunteers. About half were female. Approximately 75% were white. The average age was 57. 75% of them had attended college, all had good jobs, and all had good health care because they were part of the Kaiser Permanente health maintenance organization. The participants were asked the 10 questions about childhood trauma that had been identified earlier in their research literature. Again, those are questions on physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, the mother being treated violently, household substance abuse, household mental illness, parental separation or divorce, or an incarcerated household family member. They group these into three types of ACEs. One is the abuse, which includes the physical, emotional, and sexual questions of the 10-part survey. Neglect, which are the physical and emotional questions, and then the household dysfunction, which is the mental illness, the incarcerated relative, the mother being treated violently, substance misuse, and our divorce. If you ever Googled the ACEs study, you would get this depiction of this. This is really what their study amounted to, and showed the scientific gaps and everything that kind of happens in a person's life. So it's called the ACE pyramid, and it represents a conceptual framework for the ACEs study, which has uncovered how adverse childhood experiences are strongly related to various risk factors for disease throughout the lifespan, according to the CDC. Adverse childhood experiences are very common. For example, 28% of the study participants reported physical abuse and 21% reported sexual abuse. Many also reported experience of divorce or parental separation, or having a parent with a mental and or substance misuse disorder. Adverse childhood experiences often occur together. Almost 40% of the original sample reported 2 or more ACEs, and about 12.5% experienced 4 or more. Again, this does not necessarily dictate their future, but it has a great impact. Because ACE occurs in clusters, many subsequent studies have examined the cumulative effect of ACEs rather than the individual effect of each. ACEs does have a dose-response relationship with many health problems. As researchers followed participants over time, they discovered that a person's ACE score has a strong graded relationship to numerous health, social, and behavioral health problems throughout their lifespan. Many of the problems related to ACEs tend to be comorbid or co-occurring, again, that they're kind of coming to. People with a score of ACEs score of 4 or more had starkly higher rates of heart disease and diabetes with those compared to of an ACE score of 0. The likelihood of chronic pulmonary lung disease increased by about 390%. Again, this is with an ACE score of 4 or more. A depression is about 460% higher, and suicide is 1,220% higher. According to the ACE study, the rougher the childhood, the higher your score is likely to be and the higher risk for various health problems are later. It could affect your behavior, lack of physical activity. It could cause you to smoke, use alcohol, have drug use, or miss work. Some physical and mental health that could be affected is severe obesity, diabetes, depression, and suicide attempts. STDs, heart disease, cancer, stroke, and broken bones because of the violence. Reactions to trauma are sometimes misdiagnosed as symptoms of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder because kids dealing with adverse experiences may be impulsive, acting out with anger or other stronger emotions. It's something that's very common in trauma, difficulty in regulating emotions and behavior. That's why a lot of kids get into trouble in the classroom, that often they're misdiagnosed. There are research studies testing interventions that can build resilience in kids and children who are growing up with adverse experiences. Not just problems in the family, such as the ACE study investigated, but also trauma stemming from poverty, for example, or from chronic stress or of racial or gender discrimination. When you get the questionnaire, you'll be able to identify what your score is. Children with toxic stress in their lives live their lives in fight, flight, or freeze mode. Unable to concentrate, their brains are incapable of learning, and they fall behind in school. They respond to a world as a place of constant danger, not trusting adults, and unable to develop healthy relationships with peers, often self-sabotaging relationships. They feel a failure, despair, shame, and frustration as well. As they grow up and transition into adulthood, they find comfort by overindulging in food, alcohol, tobacco, as nicotine is an antidepressant, drugs, methamphetamines are antidepressants. They may overindulge in work. They may partake in high-risk sports, a plethora of sexual partners, anything that pumps up feel-good moments so they can escape, even if it's for a brief moment. The sharp, tenacious claws of agonizing memories and of despair and of the hurt. We are not interested in giving kids ACE scores. We don't want to define the kids are adults by their ACEs. The children who are experiencing trauma and the neurobiological, physiological, and social challenges associated with trauma, focusing on 3 things will help them be successful. These 3 things are a strong relationship with a parent, or surrogate caregiver, someone who can be a good teacher, good cognitive skills, an ability to self-regulate attention, emotional, and behaviors. Toxic stress is a term used by psychologists and developmental neurobiologists to describe the kinds of experiences, particularly in childhood, that can affect brain architecture and brain chemistry. They typically are experiences that are bad for an individual during development, such as severe abuse. The fight, flight, fright, or freeze response to stress is now called the fight, flight, or freeze response. Stress experts around the world are adding the word freeze to the name in deference to the fact that instead of fighting or fleeing, sometimes we tend to freeze, kind of like a deer in the headlights in traumatic situations. The flight, freeze response is automatic response you cope with when in danger. For example, you may yell at your mom for pushing you to take your driving test when you didn't feel like you were ready. You're fighting there. You may avoid going to a party or leave early because you feel uncomfortable around people you don't know. This is flight. Or you may freeze and hope that danger doesn't notice you, like when your mind goes blank when the teacher asks you a question. This flight, fight, freeze thing is pretty cool. It's like having superhero powers that you can activate when you need to protect yourself. Again, this is just some experiences or things that may have happened to somebody if they have a score of 4 or more. Just some things are more likely to be alcoholics, twice as likely to smoke, which again endangers heart disease or cancer, 12 more times likely to attempt suicide. And then men with high scores of 6 or more were 46 more times as likely to have used injected drugs. By reducing our risk factors and increasing our protective factors, we can decrease the effect of negative experiences you have on our lives. Your ACE score does not define you. That's an important thing to remember, that it doesn't define you. It doesn't necessarily tell you what your future is going to be. It's just a guideline. At this time, I would like to introduce Leslie Crow from the Muscogee Creek Nation, and she's going to discuss how using ACE has helped out in their community. Leslie, welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so we have used ACEs, or the concept, in a few different ways at Muscogee Creek Nation. And I know a lot of us are all working towards having trauma-informed care and just being more, trauma-focused with our services that we provide. And that also applies to prevention and outreach. So we started using these concepts initially really when we were working on our Native Connection Strategic Action Plan. We worked with our advisory board, and we educated them, if they weren't already aware, about ACEs and risk factors and protective factors that Vicki was just talking about. So we then identified what we see in our communities, and we do have a very large service area, and we have to take that into consideration also. But we identified, the strengths and then the concerns, which is sort of like protective factors versus risk factors, and then also the resources in our communities, which were able to help us counteract or the risk factors and build on our protective factors. And that goes along with SAMHSA's strategic prevention framework, which, is something that we use and base all of our programs off of. And then when we're doing our community readiness assessments, we're measuring these same things to try to, see where we're at, and that helps us determine what we're going to use, what strategies we're going to implement within our communities, and with our efforts for addressing substance abuse and suicide prevention and promoting mental health. So, like Vicki said, it's not a label to get someone their ACE score, but it helps them, be more aware of where they are. And then when we're working with youth who are having issues, we want to make sure that we're not asking them to do things that they're not ready to do. Just like the community as a whole when we're developing our prevention program. So if I have a 0 ACE score and I'm working with a youth that has a 10, and I'm not understanding where they're coming from or why they're not responding to the program or what we're trying to, our strategies, our interventions that we're trying to do with them, we can look at those things and try to meet them where they're at and be able to help them at their level. So we also use this concept in trying to come up with some of our social marketing campaigns and things that our messages that we're putting out in the communities. We wanted to let people know that by knowing where they're at, knowing what their ACE score is, that, and, seeing where other people are at as well, they are not alone. These problems are very common. We're trying to battle the stigma. That was a big thing that keeps coming up in our community assessments. And even when we did develop our strategic action plan, that stigma is a huge problem of getting people to talk about these issues, getting people to not be afraid to seek help. And so we utilize, these concepts to come up with some marketing ideas just to encourage help-seeking behavior, and that it's not a weakness to have a mental health issue. It's very common, and that there's lots of resources in our communities to get help. And so we're doing a lot of different things with the media and things of that nature to encourage people, and that it's a sign of strength to ask for help, and that we can strengthen our tribe and our communities and our families by seeking help when it's needed. The final thing that I want to talk about, back in the fall, we did have, and this was a direct use of the ACE study, we had several tragedies within our communities, and they were all using or affecting young men. And there was 5 deaths right in a row that I consider to be a suicide. I don't know if they were actually labeled suicide after everything was said and done. But one involved a suicide that was related to domestic violence. Another one was related to substance abuse and someone intentionally jumping out of a moving vehicle. Another one was a self-inflicted gunshot during while the person was intoxicated. And then we also had some of our law enforcement officers directly involved witnessing a suicide that it could have gone a lot differently, but the perpetrator ended up shooting himself right in front of the law enforcement officers. So these things all happened within a couple of weeks of each other, and it was brought to the attention of our chief, and many community members were upset and concerned, and he was getting a lot of calls, and he finds this issue to be very important. He has a lot of experience in his previous job where he worked with veterans and people who have mental health issues. So he asked some of us to come together and form a committee to plan and coordinate a men's summit to bring together men of all ages males within our tribal members throughout our communities. And it was held right before Thanksgiving. And they asked some of our elders to come as well, and they reached out to some of our ceremonial grounds and our traditional people and the members of our Indian churches and the leaders of these churches. They also they interviewed 3 of our most notable elders and from represented these different sectors of our community, and asked them how they felt about their childhood experiences and how they handled trauma when it happened to them, and how they can use their culture or their spiritual beliefs to be a protective factor, and how we can reach out to youth in our communities and try to help them and use these protective factors for healing. So the chief's office and our media departments and our public relations, also the College of the Muscogee Nation, and then some of the elders and behavioral health, we got together and we planned this event, and we had one of our clinicians who is Native and who is a male, because I'm not a male, so I had to step back on this one and let them do it. But we did a presentation similar to how Vicki just explained the ACE study and what it means. And then we were able to use some equipment from one of our community partners to conduct a real-time poll. And we had 60 people at this event, but only 35 of them wanted to participate in the questionnaire, which that was fine, but we gave everyone a copy of it so they could look at it after 10 questions. And then we went through and we asked the group to answer for themselves, but it was anonymous, so we couldn't see what their answers were. And we had a panel of men that are leaders in our communities. And they were all very surprised to see how high the scores were overall, and that how so many of them had experienced childhood trauma. And that they all had that in common, and that we can all work together to have a better understanding of how these things are impacting our youth. And one of the things that came out of that was they are developing a mentoring program. We're forming a separate entity and a nonprofit organization that will keep that more sustainable. So they're trying to develop that to be an ongoing mentoring program for male youth that are having these issues. And then, of course, we want to follow up with addressing females as well, because, we don't want to leave them out. But since all of these things that occurred brought attention to the high prevalence of suicide among our male youth, we're addressing that first. But it's still a work in progress, but we were able to bring some awareness to some people that can really impact our communities. Like I said, we have a large service area, and sometimes it's really difficult to reach some of those different pockets of the community. And this was really good that they brought it from a male perspective, because many of our people who are working on these projects are female, and of course most of our behavioral health staff, because that's just the nature of that career field, that most of us are female, and we need to get more, males on board so that they have someone that they can relate to that's presenting these messages to them and getting these efforts spread more throughout our community. So, I hope that, that I explained that fully. I can't see the slides right now, so I don't know if they're going through. But I know there's some on there where they you can see the percentages and how they responded. There was, like I said, 35 males at this event that were participating in the questionnaire, and they were ranging from all ages of adulthood, from 18 to probably 80. And so I feel like we really got to reach out to some people who had definitely never heard of this before and had no concept of understanding how trauma during childhood can affect someone throughout their life. And we were able to kind of explain why we have these different prevention programs, because we have a representative from our tobacco prevention, our diabetes prevention, and then our suicide prevention and substance abuse prevention, and, why these programs are so important to helping our people. So if you guys have any questions when we get to that point, feel free to ask me. But those are the main ways that we've utilized the ACEs study in our Native Connections program out in Muscogee Creek Nation.
Thank you, Leslie. It's very nice to hear what you have done to help the men in your community. And what I really particularly like is how you also correlated this back to your community readiness as well as your strategic action plan. Thank you again.
Thank you.
So, again, this is the Native Connections approach here. Some of you are still working on your community readiness assessments and interviewing and scoring and coming up with your where your community should be at, where you should start. And then some are starting to develop your strategic action plan. And to go back to what Leslie was saying, they really took some of the ACEs information and applied it to their strategic action plan.
This is our time for questions and answers. You can ask a question in two ways. First, you can enter your question in the chat box located at the bottom right side of your screen, or you can ask a question by unmuting your phone line by pressing #6 to ask a question, and then press *6 to remute your phone line. Again, if you have a question either for Vicki or for our presenter, Leslie, you can type in your question in the chat box, or you can ask your question over the phone by pressing *6 to unmute your phone line.
Hi, this is Katie Coyne. I was wondering if anybody's seen the documentary film of Paper Tigers. It was for the Lincoln Alternative High School in Walla Walla, where they had behavioral issues and for academic performance, and they've discovered through the ACEs dealing with. I'm trying to figure out how to get a copy of it so that I could watch it. I was just wondering if anybody has seen that.
This is Vicki, and I have heard of it. I just have not seen it. That might be a good thing to watch, so we can be a little more prepared and understanding of ACEs.
Right, and Vicki, one of the first questions that came in through the chat box is, do you have more information about ACEs related to personal or family?
We can probably find articles or find some information on that. We can work with your coordinator, or you can contact me directly, and I can direct you to some articles on that.
Okay, and the next question is, Is there any information about combining ACES study with the Whitbeck's historical loss questions? Are you familiar with that?
I'm not.
Perhaps that's something that we'll look into and follow back up with you, okay?
Yes.
And another question that's coming through the chat box, Vicki or Leslie, or is anyone familiar with a men's conference? And does anyone know if there's one planned in the future?
I don't know of any, and we had talked about maybe having one. That was something that the leaders in our tribe, see as a need, and that was definitely kind of the hope that when they had the men's summit for our tribal leaders and the male members of our tribe to come together and maybe be able to find some things like that to do to reach out. So hopefully there will be something in the future. And we're planning a suicide prevention conference and probably be held in Tulsa in September. And so we are trying to have some of our breakout sessions to be involving the historical loss and historical trauma, generational trauma, along with the ACEs study. So we're researching that now, and I'll probably have more information. I can forward that to Vicki too when it becomes available.
Okay, great. Thanks, Leslie. So we had a couple questions come into the chat box that are similarly related. So once you have the ACE score and or if the ACE test has triggered anything, how do you respond and how do you begin addressing these issues that come up from the ACE score?
As always, when you're dealing with something with such trauma or that can open up some wounds or have some people maybe express some issues there, it's always good to have other behavioral health people in the room that can maybe address this. Part of it is also watching your room, people's actions, reactions, and never let anybody leave a room by themselves without somebody else following them out just to make sure that they're okay. But again, it's always important to have somebody, a behavioral health person there to address any of these issues. I am not a MSW. I come more from a prevention background, so I always make sure that there's other people in the room that can help me out when I'm the main facilitator or the presenter. Leslie, can you maybe address this as a MSW?
I'm an LPC.
LPC. Sorry.
It's okay. Well, we did have clinicians present when we did this in that group format, and we had a comfort room as well, and we had resources available. We also had a representative from behavioral health that could take referrals if anyone needed to explore getting services or what might be available for them if they needed something. And some clinicians do use this in therapy as part of their therapy. So obviously, they're addressing it at that time. But every time we do any type of topic about this, we have a clinician present, and if it's a large group, we have a comfort room available.
Thank you, Leslie.
Another question that has come in over the chat box is, when presenting or talking about ACEs in your community, how do you approach discussing communal injury by colonization or historical trauma and how that factors into ACEs?
Again, this would be knowing your community readiness level as well before you would do something like this. But then again, having the appropriate people that can handle such a sensitive topic available for issues that may arise with the participants. And always having elders present is also a good thing, too.
Another question that has come in through the chat box is on the ACEs questionnaire. It asks about mother and stepmothers being abused. Can you exchange that question to ask about fathers and stepfathers being abused?
I would think so. The questions, they don't necessarily, they're not copyrighted in that sense, but I would assume that would work well, especially if, it's a single father home or the father really takes on the role as the mother. That's something we can definitely find out for sure.
Leslie, this next question I think you might be able to provide a response to is, when you're looking for the men in your community to mentor other men, are you recruiting them? Do they have to have a degree? How are you going about that process?
Oh, that's a really good question, and I'm trying to provide some input to the people who are currently working on that. At this point, I think they're looking, they're taking volunteers basically, and so what I'm trying to have them do is require training, because some of the volunteers may not necessarily have, they want to help, but they may not have experience working with youth, or maybe haven't worked with youth who have mental health issues or behavior problems. So we're just trying to have them, if they volunteer for that they will be required to at least start off with some training such as QPR, youth mental health first aid, and then those types of trainings. And then they're doing it gradually, so it's going to be kind of a learning process. And so that's what I'm trying to have them do at this point. Like I said, they're forming their own nonprofit organization. We're just kind of consulting and trying to provide support for that. So hopefully we'll be able to work together to make sure that the volunteers are equipped with the tools that they need. And they're going to be doing a lot of group activities with the youth that initially, I think, is planned. So, but yeah, that was a concern that I had as well. So we're working on that.
Okay, and it looks like we've reached the top of the hour. Barbara, I see that you'd asked if you needed to unmute your line to speak, and you do indeed need to. If you would like to, we can go ahead and reserve this last question or comment to you. You can just press #6 to unmute your phone line.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to touch base and I made a comment that, and I'm with Native Connections, I'm a community coordinator, that before we do this survey, that we really create a trauma-informed setting to do this. Even many of us that work in the field, if we take the ACE survey, we can see that we may have high markers, and I've done presentations on ACE, and there are people that are providers or case managers, and it's been very frustrating and scary to them just to get that information. And so before we open that up, we also have to connect folks to resources. We have to create that safe place. and not just for the time immediately following the survey or after the presentation, that we have to connect them back to help within their community as we begin to explore what we're already doing, or or what are our resources to address the trauma that we've experienced as children, and then throughout the lifespan. And so I just want to encourage people that to have resources available if you're going to administer the survey. And I know you're wrapping up.
Thank you, Barbara. No, thank you. That's a great reminder. So at this time, just because this is such a tough topic and to do it in an appropriate way, I would like to invite Hunter to close us up for this. And thank you all that have attended the webinar today.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'd like to do this song here. It's a victory song, and I'd like to ask everybody that's still on here just to close your eye for a minute and think about how you envision your community and your families if you were in a perfect situation and you came back to your community and everything was working well. What would that look like? And because everyone on here, you guys carry the hope for our people who are struggling, and they need to look at you and hope that you can carry the strength and the resilience of our ancestors forward to healing in our community. So the song is a victory song, and while I sing this song, if you want to just think about those things that you're praying for, that you can envision wellness in your own communities, we could start taking away those layers of colonialism and start reversing that. So this is a victory song, and just to help you on that path.
Thank you very much, Hunter.
In closing, I would like to remind everyone that today's webinar was recorded and that the audio and PowerPoint will be made available online at samhsa.gov/native-connections. Before signing off today, please take a moment to fill out a brief participant questionnaire and let us know how our team did presenting the webinar topic and information. The questionnaire will automatically open on your screen when the webinar ends. Thank you again for joining today's webinar, and thank you to Victoria and Leslie and Hunter. Our session is now concluded.